The week before my wedding, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, smoothing place cards on the counter while the kettle clicked behind me. The apartment smelled like warm paper and lemon cleaner. Everything felt quiet in that ordinary, end-of-day way. My mom called right as I lined up the last row. I put her on speaker, kept writing names, and tried to sound normal. She didn't waste time with hello. "Sweetheart," she said, in that tight, careful voice she used when she wanted something. "You're going to need to scale this wedding back. We need the money." I stopped moving my pen. For a second, I just listened to the faint hum of the fridge and her breathing on the line, like she'd said something reasonable. Like this was a simple household adjustment. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at the folder on the corner of the counter, an envelope I'd picked up from my parents' porch earlier that day by accident, still sealed, with the bank's logo stamped across the front. I remember thinking, very calmly, "So that's what this is." "Mom," I said evenly, "I'm not changing the wedding." There was a pause, then the smallest shift in her tone. "You always make things difficult," she said. I set my phone face down on the counter, like it could cool the moment off. Then I waited. I didn't know yet that a month later I'd be listening to my father's voice again, only this time it wouldn't be in a private call, and it would involve a microphone. I grew up in a place called Cedar Grove, a middle-class suburb outside St. Louis. Our house was a 2-story colonial with a backyard that always smelled like cut grass in summer. Kids ran through sprinklers, lawn chairs squeaked. On the surface, it was the kind of neighborhood where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. My dad worked insurance claims. My mom taught 3rd grade. They kept a neat house. They remembered to sign permission slips. We had dinner most nights at the same time. But there was a pattern in our family that I noticed early, even before I had words for it. On my 7th birthday, I asked for a simple art set I'd seen at the craft store. Colored pencils, charcoal sticks, a little metal tin. My mom told me it was too much right now, but promised cake and a few friends over instead. 2 weeks later, my brother, Evan, mentioned he wanted to try hockey. Within days, there were glossy new skates by the door, pads stacked in the hall closet, and my dad laughing as he tested the tape on a new stick. I remember sitting on the stairs that night, watching my mom do the budget at the kitchen table. I could hear the scratch of her pen. "We'll tighten things this month," she told my dad, not sounding worried. "Evan has potential. We have to nurture that." It wasn't said cruelly. That was almost the strange part. It was said like a fact. As we got older, it kept happening in bigger ways. My parents never missed Evan's games. They rearranged weekends. They drove hours for tournaments. My mom wore his teen colors like it was a uniform. When I won a regional science award in 8th grade, neither of them came to the ceremony. My mom said she had papers to grade. My dad said he couldn't skip Evan's practice. When I got home, I received a quick, "That's nice, honey." And then my dad asked if I'd seen where Evan put his glove. My grandmother, Ruth, noticed. She lived in a small apartment closer to the city, and when I stayed with her on weekends, everything slowed down. The building always smelled like old books and laundry soap. She'd make tea and sit across from me while I showed her my sketchbook. Buildings, bridges, tiny floor plans I drew just because I liked how lines could turn into something solid. She didn't make a big performance out of it. She just looked, really looked, and nodded. "You've got a steady mind," she'd say. "Don't let anybody rush you out of it." Those weekends were the only place I didn't feel like I was competing with someone who wasn't even competing back. By high school, I stopped expecting help. I stayed late to use the library computers because we only had one at home, and Evan usually had it for games. When Evan struggled in algebra, my parents hired a tutor. When I struggled in chemistry, my mom told me to focus more and slid a used workbook across the table. When Evan turned 16, my parents bought him a used SUV that smelled like leather cleaner and old fries. They made a whole afternoon of it. Photos, jokes, my dad tossing in the keys like it was a movie scene. When I turned 16, I got a card with $20 inside and a reminder that college was expensive. My best friend Tessa was the first person outside my family to say it out loud. After she spent a weekend at my house, she pulled me aside near the pantry, away from the noise. "Does it ever bother you?" she asked carefully. "How different it is with him?" I remember staring at the cereal boxes like the answer might be printed there. It bothered me. It always had. I just wasn't used to hearing someone else name it. And once it had a name, it was harder to ignore. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat at my desk and opened my planner. I wrote down my next week in neat, small handwriting. Then I wrote one extra line at the bottom, like a private contract. Figure it out yourself. I closed the planner and turned off the light. Then I lay there, listening to the quiet house, already learning how to be someone they didn't have to notice in order for me to survive. By the time senior year arrived, independence wasn't a personality trait anymore. It was just how my days were structured. I worked weekends at a small bookstore near the bus stop. The place smelled like dust and coffee grounds, and the register stuck unless you pressed the drawer just right. I liked the quiet. I liked knowing exactly what was expected of me. No guessing, no waiting to be noticed. Evan, meanwhile, moved through the house like gravity bent around him. When he got a C, there were meetings and tutors. When I brought home straight A's, the papers went on the fridge for a few days, then quietly disappeared. Graduation night was warm and bright. Cicadas buzzed outside the auditorium. I remember adjusting the robe at my shoulders, waiting for my name to be called. When I stepped up to the podium as valedictorian, I scanned the crowd out of habit. My parents were there. Technically. My mom was fixing Evan's tie. My dad was looking down at his phone. I spoke clearly anyway. About effort. About patience. About building something slowly and on purpose. The applause came and went like weather. Later that night, I overheard my dad telling a family friend how proud he was that Evan had been accepted to a private university with a partial athletic scholarship. My acceptance to an Ivy, also partial, academic, had gotten a nod and a change of subject when the letter arrived. My grandmother took me out to dinner the next day. She folded the acceptance letter carefully and slipped it into her purse like it was something valuable. It ended up framed on her wall, not ours. That summer, the house filled with boxes for Evan. New laptop, bedding, clothes. My parents talked in lists and plans. I picked up extra shifts and started researching loans. When people asked if I was excited, I told them I was ready. College was relentless. I worked 3 jobs: coffee shop mornings, library afternoons, remote data entry on weekends. I ate whatever was cheap and filling and kept my head down. My parents paid tens of thousands toward Evan's tuition. For me, they offered a one-time check and a reminder that I'd chosen an expensive path. I didn't argue. I just adjusted. One winter break, I stayed on campus. I told them I had work. The truth was I couldn't afford the trip, and I didn't want to watch the familiar dynamic replay itself. I spent Christmas eating instant noodles and finishing projects early. It was quiet. It was manageable. Things changed during my junior year in a sustainable design elective. Not dramatically, just steadily. That's where I met Daniel. He listened. That was the first thing I noticed. Not in a flattering way, just attentive, like what I was saying had weight. His family was warm in a way that felt foreign to me. They asked questions and waited for the answers. That same semester, I won a design competition. My work was published in a small industry journal. I called my parents. My mom cut the conversation short because they were on their way to watch Evan play an intramural game. Daniel found me sitting in the studio afterward, staring at my phone. "They might never see you," I said quietly. "Then that's on them," he replied, without drama. Around that time, Evan dropped out. My parents didn't frame it as failure. They framed it as vision. They helped him start a business. I kept eating 1 meal a day to save money for textbooks. I graduated with honors. My grandmother came. Daniel's parents came. My parents arrived late and left early because Evan had a meeting. That was when something settled into place for me. Not bitterness, just clarity. I stopped checking my phone for validation that wasn't coming. After graduation, I landed a job at a respected architecture firm back in St. Louis. It wasn't flashy. It was solid. My dad asked if it paid enough to handle my loans. That was the whole response. When Evan's business failed months later, my parents paid off his debt and moved him back home. When I raised concerns, my mom said, "We take care of our children." I didn't respond. There wasn't anything new to add. Over the next few years, I built a career slowly and carefully. Promotions came. Responsibility followed. I learned to trust systems more than approval. Daniel stayed steady. We moved in together. Life became quieter in good ways. Evan tried again. Another business. More investment. This time, my parents mortgaged the house. When I suggested professional advice, my dad laughed and told me I didn't understand risk. I drove home that day in silence. 2 weeks later, I was promoted again. That same weekend, Daniel proposed by the river at sunset. It was simple, thoughtful, exactly right. When I told my parents, my mom asked about the ring. That was it. The wedding plans moved forward without them. Until suddenly, they didn't. That's when the calls started, the opinions, the pressure, and the envelope on their porch. I hadn't opened it yet. I set it on the counter, made tea, and decided to wait. I opened the envelope the next morning, not because I was emotional about it, just because it was there. And unopened things tend to demand space in your head until you deal with them. The paper was thick, formal, the kind banks use when they want to sound calm about serious problems. I stood at the counter, sunlight coming in through the blinds, and read it once all the way through without stopping. Then I read it again, slower. The numbers didn't surprise me. The timing did. They were 3 months behind. The mortgage had been restructured once already. The notice wasn't dramatic, no threats in bold, but it was clear. They were close to running out of options. I folded the letter back into its envelope and set it beside my planner. Then I made tea. I've learned over the years that rushing emotional information makes it louder than it needs to be. Silence, on the other hand, gives you room to think. Over the next week, the calls from my mother became more frequent. Not frantic, controlled, almost polite. She asked about flower colors again, suggested a different seating arrangement, mentioned that certain guests might expect something more traditional. I didn't argue. I listened. I answered briefly. I wrote things down. At night, after Daniel went to sleep, I sat at the dining table and opened my laptop. Not to vent, to organize. I pulled our wedding contracts into one folder. Venue, catering, florals, deposits, cancellation clauses, dates, non-refundable amounts highlighted neatly. Then I pulled my parents' past messages, the ones where I'd offered help, where I'd suggested a financial advisor, where I'd asked questions and been dismissed. I didn't annotate them emotionally, I just arranged them in order. Timeline matters when people try to rewrite history. A few days later, my mom showed up at our apartment unannounced with photos of new centerpieces. Red roses, gold accents. Expensive. "I already paid for them," she said, setting her phone down like it settled the issue. "You should be grateful. We're under a lot of strain helping Evan." I looked at the photos, then at Daniel, then back at her. "We're not using those," I said calmly. Her face tightened. "You're being dramatic." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain again. I just repeated myself once. She left upset. She always did when she didn't get her way. That night, my father called. His voice was sharp, accusatory. "Your mother is in tears," he said, "after everything we've done for you." I waited until he finished speaking. "This is our wedding," I said. "We're not changing it." "If you keep acting like this," he warned, "we may not even attend." I let the silence stretch longer than was comfortable. "Okay," I replied. He hung up. The quiet afterward felt different, not heavy, clear. 2 weeks passed with minimal contact. During that time, I finished one more thing. I wrote out 3 rules, not for them, for me. Step 1, no financial discussions without documents. Step 2, no last-minute changes to plans already paid for. Step 3, silence is a valid response. I printed the list and slid it into my planner. When my parents asked to meet for coffee a month before the wedding, I agreed. Public place, neutral ground, middle of the day. They didn't ease into it. "We're in serious trouble," my father said, leaning forward. "We could lose the house." My mother nodded, eyes shiny but focused. Then came the request, calmly phrased, carefully framed. They wanted us to downsize the wedding and give them the savings. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. I opened my planner instead. I turned it toward them and showed them the numbers, contracts, deposits, dates. "This isn't flexible," I said, "and I'm not paying for decisions I didn't make." My father stared at the table. My mother called me cold. I didn't argue. I just repeated the boundary. "No." That night, extended families started texting, confused, concerned, clearly misinformed. I didn't respond immediately. I added those messages to the folder. Then I closed my laptop, rinsed my mug, and went to bed. Because at that point, I understood something important. They weren't asking for help. They were testing whether the old patterns still worked, and I already knew my answer. The week after the coffee meeting, my phone stayed quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No calls, no check-ins, just space. I used it. I confirmed every vendor. I reread every contract. I forwarded copies to Daniel and backed them up to a shared drive. Not because I expected sabotage, but because clarity is easier to defend than emotion. Then my cousin called, not to ask how I was doing, to warn me. My mother, she said carefully, had been telling people I was refusing to help the family in a crisis, that I was choosing a party over my parents' home, that I'd changed. I thanked her and hung up. Then I wrote one more note in my planner. Narratives spread when facts stay silent. 2 days later, my mother called again, her voice softer than it had been in weeks. "I just don't understand why you're being so rigid," she said. "Family should come first." I didn't debate the philosophy. "I've already explained my decision," I replied. "It hasn't changed." She sighed. "People are starting to ask questions." "I'm aware." That was when the pressure shifted. They didn't argue anymore. They inserted themselves. 2 weeks before the wedding, they showed up at the final venue walkthrough. No warning, no invitation. The coordinator looked at me, waiting for direction. My mother started talking like she owned the room, moving the ceremony, adding tables, suggesting changes that had already been finalized. I let her finish. Then I said, "None of that is happening." My father's voice sharpened. "We're your parents." "And this meeting is over," I replied. They left angry, loudly. I apologized to the coordinator, signed the final documents, and asked that no changes be made without written approval from me or Daniel. She nodded and made a note. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I just felt tired in a precise way, like a task nearing completion. That night, Evan showed up at our apartment. He looked different, smaller. The confidence he'd always carried like armor was gone. "They're scared," he said, "about the house." "I know." "You could help," he pressed. "Just make this easier." I didn't raise my voice. "I already have helped," I said, "for years, just not financially." He frowned. "You always make things harder than they need to be." I met his eyes. No, I stopped making them easier at my expense. He left without slamming the door. The wedding arrived anyway. The morning was clear, bright. The garden smelled like damp leaves and flowers warming in the sun. As I got dressed, I felt calm, not numb, just settled. My parents arrived late, sat where they were placed, commented anyway. I didn't respond. The ceremony was exactly as planned. Simple, intentional, real. At the reception, everything flowed until the speeches. Daniel's father spoke first, kind, warm, grateful. My grandmother spoke next, brief, steady, proud. Then my father took the microphone. He cleared his throat, spoke about independence, about choices, about disappointment wrapped in politeness. Then he shifted. Our family is going through a difficult time financially, he said. If anyone here is able to help. The room went still. I stood up before I thought about it. I walked forward, held out my hand, and waited. He hesitated. Then he gave me the microphone. I didn't rush. I looked around the room once, and then I spoke. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't apologize for interrupting. I just held the microphone the way you do when you already know what you're going to say. I think some context would be helpful, I began, calmly. The room stayed quiet, not awkward quiet, attentive quiet. For most of my life, I continued, there's been a clear difference in how support worked in my family. My brother received financial and emotional backing at every turn. I was expected to figure things out on my own. I didn't look at my parents yet. I didn't need to. I worked multiple jobs through school. I paid for my education. I built my career without assistance. Meanwhile, my parents paid for my brother's tuition and funded several business ventures. I paused, just long enough. A month ago, I said, they asked Daniel and me to cancel this wedding and give them the money instead. Not because of an emergency they couldn't foresee, but because of financial decisions they made after being advised not to. There were small sounds then, chairs shifting, someone inhaling sharply. I'm not sharing this to embarrass anyone, I said. I'm sharing it because this is the last time my life will be framed inaccurately on my behalf. I turned, finally, and looked at my parents. I love you, I said evenly, but I'm no longer available to be used as a solution to problems I didn't create. My mother's face had gone pale. My father looked rigid, jaw set, eyes fixed somewhere behind me. I turned back to the room. Thank you to everyone who has supported us. Not conditionally, not strategically, but genuinely. That support is the reason this day exists. I handed the microphone back to Daniel. He didn't add much. What my wife said, he said simply. Now let's continue. The music came back on like someone turning a light switch. My parents stood a few minutes later. No scene, no words. They just left. Evan followed. I stayed where I was. People came up quietly, touched my arm, squeezed my hand, said things like, "That took courage," or "You handled that with grace." I thanked them. Then I went back to the dance floor. Later, under the lights in the conservatory, Daniel leaned in and asked, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. Lighter, I said. When the night ended and the last guests drifted out, I didn't feel hollow or victorious. I felt done, and that mattered more than anything else. We left for our honeymoon 2 days later. Greece in late summer was all pale stone and salt air. Mornings started slow. Coffee on balconies. Quiet streets before the heat set in. For the first time in months, my phone stayed mostly untouched. Distance has a way of restoring proportion. When we returned home, reality waited, but it felt smaller. There were voicemails from extended family. Not angry ones, curious ones, supportive ones. A few people admitted they'd noticed the imbalance over the years but hadn't known how to name it. Now it had a name. My parents, I learned through my cousin, had moved out of the house. The mortgage had finally caught up with them. They were renting a small apartment across town. My father stopped mentioning timelines. My mother stopped offering explanations. The consequences weren't dramatic. They were procedural. Late fees, credit hits, downsizing, the kind of outcomes that arrive quietly after a long series of choices. A few weeks later, Evan asked to meet for coffee. I went. Cautious, but open. He looked tired. Not defeated, just stripped of certainty. "I didn't see it before," he said after a while. "How uneven it was." I listened. "I moved out," he added. "Got a regular job. I'm not taking their money anymore." I nodded, not approving, not skeptical, just present. We didn't resolve anything that day, but for the first time, we spoke without accusation. That felt like something. 2 months later, my mother emailed, formal, careful, asking to talk. I met them alone at a neutral restaurant, daytime, public. They said my words at the wedding had hurt them. I said they were true. When my mother insisted they'd always supported me, I listed dates, events, decisions. Not emotionally, just accurately. They didn't apologize, not fully, but they didn't argue either. When my mother asked if they could visit our home sometime, I said yes, with boundaries. That was the first time I saw my father really look at me. "You've changed," he said. "I have," I replied. "I had to." The months after that were quieter. Work settled into a steady rhythm. Daniel and I built routines, grocery lists, Sunday walks, shared calendars, ordinary things, solid things. Then, a year after the wedding, we found out I was pregnant. The news landed softly, joy mixed with caution, memory. "I'm afraid of repeating patterns," I admitted one night. Daniel didn't hesitate. "You know what not to do," he said. "That's already different." When we told his parents, they cried. When we told mine, my mother smiled genuinely. My father said congratulations and meant it, even if he didn't know how to show it well. Evan was the one who surprised me most. "This kid will never doubt themselves," he said. "I promise." I believed he was trying. These days, my parents are still learning. Sometimes they slip. Sometimes old habits surface. The difference is I don't carry them anymore. I notice, I name, I decide. That's the resolution no one sees in photos. It's quiet, and it holds. On most mornings now, I wake up before the alarm. The apartment is quiet in that early way where the world hasn't started asking for anything yet. I make tea. I stand by the window. I watch the street come to life slowly. Delivery trucks, joggers, someone unlocking a storefront. There's a steadiness to my days that didn't exist before. My parents and I speak occasionally. Some conversations are careful. Some are surprisingly normal. We're still rebuilding, and I no longer confuse rebuilding with surrender. If a comment crosses a line, I name it. Calmly, without rehearsal. Then I move on. That part took practice. Evan and I talk more than we used to. Not constantly, not emotionally, just honestly. We're learning each other as adults instead of rivals in a system neither of us designed. The baby arrives in a few months. Sometimes, when I fold the tiny clothes we've started collecting, I think about how different things could have been. Then I remind myself that reflection isn't regret, it's information. What I know now is simple. Worth doesn't grow from approval. Boundaries aren't punishment. Silence can be strength. And clarity is kinder than resentment. A few weeks ago, a coworker stayed late with me after a project review. We were stacking folders, shutting down screens, doing the small end-of-day rituals. She hesitated, then said, "Can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. She told me about her family, about expectations, about pressure disguised as love. I didn't give advice. I just listened. Before she left, she said, "You seem settled, like you know where you stand." I watched the office lights shut off one by one and thought about that. Settled doesn't mean untouched. It means anchored. There are other stories like this. I see them all the time now, in quiet conversations, in careful questions, in people trying to decide whether they're allowed to choose themselves. Sometimes they ask. Sometimes they just need someone to stand still long enough to prove it's possible. If you're watching this and any part of it felt familiar, take that seriously. Not urgently, just honestly. And if you want to stay here a while, if these kinds of real, calm stories help you think more clearly about your own life, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. At the very end, drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read those more than you think. 2 more stories are coming up next, ones a lot of people have been waiting for. And I'll see you there.